You are listening to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss our RC adventures.
Welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss the ups and downs of the new RC Flyer. Join your hosts, Michael and Jay, as they take flight at the park. Now on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast Studio. I'm Michael, and with me tonight, as always, is my good friend
Jay here in Texas.
That doesn't sound as good as the AK, but I hear you.
Not as much as the AK, but I'm working on it. I'll find a nice hooky line to throw in there someday.
That's always exciting to have a hook and line and sinker.
And sinker, yeah,
all three. Of those. Yeah. Well, how's it going tonight? You got any good news for us?
Well, all I can say, it's summer and you should be out there flying. Hopefully you're not running outside and being exposed to too many UV rays and catching on fire the second you go outside, like I seem to be here in Texas. I'm just a newbie from Alaska, so I'm a little, I hate to say it, timid when it comes to the sun. But I'm getting a little used to it.
Yeah, it's been hot here. I got a little burnt myself, so I have to watch that. Wear a hat.
Yeah, wear a hat. Make sure you wear your suntan lotion. For me, it's you bring out a cover. In fact, like a sun cover or something to shade yourself from planes. It's just a whole different thought process from being in Alaska. Just throw some stuff in a car, drive out to the park. Just go fly. It's sunny. Woohoo! And here, I got to be careful about what I throw in the car, how long I keep it in the car. It's just the little things that I never had to think about that are just shocking me. So
don't forget the water.
Don't forget the water. Yeah, that type of thing. So,
well, we have an email from Jim down in your neck of the woods, and he was asking. He's a glow guy.
Yes, he is,
from what I understand. And he was in his email that he sent to us. He basically was like, how do I pick a motor for electric? How do I, put all that stuff together? And so tonight we're going to take the opportunity, based on Jim's request, to discuss a little bit about motor combos, sizes, that kind of thing. Because we do realize that there's guys out at the park that
there's mass confusion out there when it comes to, and especially for guys like Jim, who are glow guys who are dabbling a little bit in electrics, and they're kind of curious because they get a motor and they're not sure what's going on, or something burns up or catches on fire, or it doesn't give them the performance they want, or their batteries puff after one use. It can be a little frustrating.
So I guess the first thing to talk about is how it all, I guess what we should do is how it all fits together and then break it down part by part. So the whole motor combo starts with the propeller, the motor, and the ESC, or what we call the escape. And those are the three components and then the battery as well. But those are the four components of the electric system that helps us get our airplanes off the ground. And then each one has its own idiosyncrasies or whatever to, help the airplane do what it needs to do. So let's start with basically the main body of it, which is the motor. And motors are designed as two types. There's an in-runner or an out-runner motor.
True. And the way to look at it is an in-runner is an enclosed can. The only thing that spins on it is the shaft. It's the only part that spins. You could hold it in your hand, and if you turned it on, the only thing that would spin out of it would be the shaft. An outrunner, the whole case, the outer case may move, along with the shaft, rotates. And it's just all how the magnets are laid out in the system. Typically, an in-runner is used for models where the motor goes more inside, or, it's a very tight fitting and you don't have a lot of room. Outrunners, they're a little cheaper to make. They're used for models, most typical models, where you have, enough room around the motor, where the case can spin, that sort of thing. Like if you have like some of the fancy gliders, they're real tight fitting. Well, then you'd use an in-runner motor, because then you could just slide it right in and then protrude the shaft right out of the end of the plane, and that would just attach a propeller and fly with it. Where the outrunner, not so much. You have to make sure you have enough room so that whole case could spin inside the enclosure.
Yeah, and the end runners, a lot of the end runners are used for EDFs because
Yes.
they just slide. They're long, they're thin, and they have this little shaft sticks out, and they just slide them in there and attach that EDF blade to the
Right.
front
They
of
go
it.
into the
So they
housing,
use
the
that.
EDF housing, which is actually, anywhere from 4 to 12 blades, which spins around. That EDF motor goes, slides into this housing, gets screwed down inside the housing, is held firm, and then you just attach the blades to the outer part of it, and it spins and, makes the EDF.
And then, like you mentioned, the gliders, but some of the airplanes can use gearboxes.
Yes.
They do have gearboxes, and so you can put the end runner with a gearbox and kind of do either an increase or decrease.
Right. They're not as popular as they
for power,
were
yeah.
because typically they
Right.
used to do that when they just had before they had brushless motors. That was used mainly for brushed motors. They weren't as powerful, and they didn't provide as much wattage or power to the system.
So for most airplanes that we fly, the 3D airplanes, the Warbirds, all those kind of things, they typically use an outrunner motor. It's a big bell housing around some electrical wires. And the first thing we need to look at is the size of the motor. And so the size of the motor usually comes what we think, the way we think of that size of the motor is either a 10, a 20, 30, 60, 90, 100. And it usually equates itself to something in the glow world. So if you have a 10, which Hacker makes a 2010 motor, which is a very small motor. It's about the size of a quarter, and it's for indoor, lightweight, foamy type airplanes. Doesn't have a whole lot of power. It can accept a little bit larger prop, and then you can fly with indoor stuff. The bigger airplanes, like my Cub, has a 60 on it, which is equivalent to a Glow.
Right, a Glow 60 Glow.
60 Glow.
Right.
So a lot of the companies now are kind of putting I guess you would call it, they're matching it. They're calling it a model match where you can basically say, well, I have a 60 Glow. I need a 60 electric motor as well.
Right, and it does simplify things by doing that, and you'll see them out there. They'll actually say this is the equivalent of a 40 Glow motor, or a 60 Glow motor, or a 90 Glow motor, or even for the equivalent of some gas ones as well. So definitely simplifies things and helps people make that translation. But like you said, for the smaller motors, something under that 40 size and under, it gets a little mysterious as to which one I should select, which one I should use. There's all these numbers. What do they mean? So that's where the confusion comes in.
So the first number, let's say the Hacker, we'll use that as the example, is a 2010. The first number is usually the can length, how long the actual motor is.
Yes.
So I have a whole stack of motors in the other room from various companies, and usually, depending on the company, they'll do like a 43, a 40-43. So that's usually a 40 size motor with a 43-inch can. And then there's usually another number associated that's called a KV.
Yes, that's very important.
And the KV is usually somewhere, like I have the 40 size motor, 43-inch can, and the KV is, if I'm not mistaken, is like 850.
Right. The higher the KV, the smaller the prop is going to be, typically.
So let's take our wings, for instance. The wings run off of a 28, right?
Right.
I think it's
a 28-inch can, or not inch, a 28 millimeter diameter can.
Right. And then it's a
2700 kV.
2700 kV. So it's got a lot higher kV than my 800. So therefore, the maximum blade on that particular one is about 6 inches.
Yeah, about 6-7 inches. Right.
Right. What happens if I run a bigger prop on that KV motor?
Okay. So this is where the confusion starts to lie. Now, can you put a smaller prop on there? Yes. Can you put a bigger prop on there? Yes. The answer is yes. And this is what drives people crazy, because you go, yes, yes. Well, how big of one? Can I put a 14-inch one on there? Well, probably not. It's probably going to burn up and make pretty smoke, blue smoke come out of all the instruments. Before we even go there, realistically for people, like I said, this gets real confusing, but one device you need to really have, it's called a watt meter. And you can kind of think of it, it's kind of like having a multimeter. If you've ever seen a multimeter, and it does a couple of different things. Well, a watt meter basically tells you how many watts you're using. It also can tell you how many amps you're using. It tells you the voltage. And this is a very important tool, because as we start to talk about this a little bit more, you really need to know the specs of your motor. How many amps it can take, how many watts it's supposed to deliver. And that's going to be very, very important, because you can have a different size prop depending on, just as long as you don't exceed the amps that motor can take. So how do you know this? Well, they kind of give you some references. If it's a good motor company, they'll actually give you references and say, hey, if you use these props, this is about what you should be getting out of them. And it's a pretty good reference for things. But for a lot of motors, they may not give you that information. They may give you the basic information that this motor can only take, say, 30 amps. What size prop can I use with that? Hopefully, they might have given you a clue as to about the size you're going to need that you can start off with, but you may have to put different types of props on different pitches, all those things, to basically see what the watt meter may be giving you back. So let's say, for example, in your example, you put that on that motor, you put a 14-inch prop on there, you begin to spin it up, and you see that immediately it jumps up to 60 amps. And let's say that motor can only take 30 amps, and it's like 2 seconds into barely moving the throttle, you see it jumps up to 60. Whoa, that prop is way too big. You need something a lot smaller. And so you could either, like I said, a lot of good references, RC groups, just looking around on Google, looking at the guys who make the motor, they usually give you some references so you can get down to about what you need, or about the size of the prop you're going to use. Once again, you get another prop, try it, and then you go, well, this should take this should take a 8-inch prop. You stick an 8-inch prop on there, and once again, you see that it starts running at 45 amps, and you go, whoa, it says it's supposed to take an 8. This one isn't quite. It's way over the amperage. Okay, well, I'll move down to a 7-inch prop, and then all of a sudden you're just around 30, or maybe you're 29, 30, and then you know that you're at the max for that particular motor. And I know that sounds kind of a roundabout thing, but it really helps if, once again, if you buy more name brand motors, you can get that information and they can give you those starting references that you need. But let's say, once again, we know that for this particular motor, it takes between a 6 and a 7-inch prop. Well, let's say you want to get, you could go with a 6x6 prop, and that's going to give you a lot of speed. For that particular plane, it's not a wing. Let's say it's just a regular plane. Let's just say it doesn't give you enough clearance. A 6-inch prop would strike the ground just with the wheels that you have. And you go, well, I need a 5-inch prop. Okay, well, you could put a 5-inch prop on there, and it'll run the plane, but it doesn't give you the oomph that 6-inch prop did. Well, what do you do now? Well, you could either take the pitch lower. A lower pitch may give you more power, more torque, or you might go to a 3-bladed propeller, right? And
Right.
that's going to give you the equivalent of a 6-inch prop, and that may be a good reference. Or you up the voltage. If you up the voltage, it gives you more power. Let's say you're running on a 3-cell battery, you move up to a 4-cell battery. You put it on the watt meter. Lo and behold, it ends up giving you the same amount of power for basically the same amount of amps. But you may actually find out that you're getting even more power out of this thing. It may be lower amps than you had before, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. Without that tool, having that watt meter that you can put these things on, try different combinations, it's almost impossible to just, some guy tells you, hey, I use this, and you try it, and, next thing you know, you smoke something. That's where people get very confused with this stuff.
So we can just do a gouge here so that The lower the kV, the larger the propeller, and probably the more amperage you can put through it. The higher the kV, the smaller the propeller, and probably less amps. And trust me, I know, because I had a 3,000 kV motor that was supposed to run on like a 3 or 4 inch prop. I put a 12-inch prop on it and a 3-cell battery. Now, let me tell you, this thing, when I let go of it, this thing went like a homesick angel. That sucker took off.
You had super performance,
oh, my gosh. It had so much power, so much energy, I just couldn't believe it. For right about 10 seconds. It took off out of my hands. It went skyward, and, man, this thing was moving. And I was like, wow, this thing has got some serious performance. Right about that time, there was a big puff of blue smoke. The engine quit, and down she came. Now, luckily, I dead sticked it right to the ground. It was not that big. You know, it was a blue core foaming kind of thing. But when I got down, I thought, what the heck is wrong with this motor? I turned it over, and the wires were literally burnt. So when I did a little research, I realized that, you know, jumping from a 4-inch prop to a 12-inch prop put my amperage up, you know, like almost 100 amps for a 12-amp ESC and motor. And it didn't last very long, and I smoked the motor pretty easily. So the higher the kV, smaller motor, lower the kV, bigger motor, but bigger prop as well.
Right. That's a good general rule that you can use.
Now, I will tell you that there is a program out there. I use it occasionally. I believe it's called MotoCalc.
MotoCalc.
The name of that?
Yes. And if you go out on the web, you can see there's a couple of different apps that are out there that you can get, that you can run on your phone or on your computer, that take a lot of the guesswork out, and they have this information. People have already input this information depending on the motor. You know, you can put in, I have a plane, it weighs this much. I want to get this kind of performance out of it. This is the size motor that I have or what I'm looking to use, and it can fill in the rest of the information for you. It's quite helpful.
So you mentioned earlier, about picking a motor prop combo or whatever, but let's say that I have one of my Glow airplanes. It's a 55-inch. It uses a 30 Glow motor, and I'm tired of being, the Glow, and I want to convert it to electric.
Right. Which
I can do.
Yes.
So now I pull the Glow motor off, and I think to myself, all right, how do I pick this motor? What motor would work well with this particular model? Well, I will tell you that the main portion that I'm looking at is how many watts that this motor will produce, because the watts out of electricity is what gives my airplane the ability to move the weight. And there's a formula for that.
Right.
You probably know it right off the top of your head, but I think it's 100 per pound.
Yeah, it's 100 watts per pound. Let's say that you said that model would weigh 5 pounds.
Right.
So if you wanted to get performance out of it, you'd want to look for a motor that gave you at least 500 watts of power, and you should be able to fly that plane around.
Right.
There's another little calculation that basically says that 500 watts will fly the plane. Are you going to get spectacular takeoff, hover the aircraft, accelerate to the sky? No, not with five pounds with 500 watts. You're going to be able to fly around normally, very scale-like, and it's going to be easy to fly. But if you want to get a little bit more performance, well, then there's another thing that basically says that if you want to get acrobatic, then you're going to need 150 watts per pound. And then if you want to get extreme performance, you want to have at least 200 watts per pound. So it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio. And that's a kind of a good rule. Of course, you can get higher than that, but between, that 100 to 200 watt range you'll understand what you're going to need for the performance out of your plane.
Right. Those are good gauges. I mean, I think that most of my 3D airplanes have somewhere around 150 to 200 watts per pound.
Right.
The bigger ones, anyway. So now we find this watt meter. The outside of the box tells us that with a 13-inch prop, this 40 size glow motor, or this 40 43 electric motor will give me 2,000 watts.
Oof.
So that's a lot.
That's a lot.
I mean, for a 5-pound airplane, if we think about it, that's a 3D type airplane, 2,000 watts. Now, how do I pick the ESC to go with this?
Well, once again, this is where you look at the box and you see that particular motor, let's say that particular motor takes a 50 amp. It takes 50 amps for that particular motor, okay, to run on. So you know that you need a minimum of a 50 amp escape or ESC to go with that motor combination, because it tells you its max is 50. For me, I might go with a 60 amp escape to go with that motor, because that way I can push that system a little bit over what the recommendation is for the motor and still be safe. I know I won't blow up my escape if I happen to go a little higher or lower, And that sometimes happens. It could be a hot day. It could be, there could be various reasons why you may be right at the maximum limit, and having the escape just have a little bit more oomph to cover that is okay. What you don't want to do is say, well, I only have a 30 amp. I'll just keep it at 3/4 throttle. I should be fine.
Exactly.
It never works out that way. Somewhere you push it full power. Somewhere you're doing something. Or you go, wow, this is performing great. And then you go, wow, I didn't know this had a smoking system. This is cool. Look at the smoke that's pouring out of this thing. It's beautiful.
So basically on an Outrunner, there's 3 wires that come out of the back of the motor.
Yes.
And those 3 wires are basically the 3 phases, and they plug into this ESC, which is a circuit board that basically controls the motor. And then on the end of that, on the opposite end of that ESC should be 3 wires. 2 of them are for battery connectors, and you can put your favorite battery connector on the red and black wire. And the other wire coming out is actually a servo wire. It looks very much like a servo wire, and it plugs into your receiver and into the throttle port.
Right.
And so now when you fire up your radio, the ESC will do its little song and dance, because it does a little chimes, to kind of power it up. And I add power, and the airplane moves backwards.
Uh-oh.
Instead of forwards.
Yeah, this confuses a lot of people.
And now this does make no sense to me. That's probably the wrong thing to say. Now that it moves backwards, it doesn't make any sense, because I have it all connected. And it powers up and it goes through its little sequence. But when I add throttle, it pushes the airplane back towards me instead of pulling it away from me.
Right.
How do I fix that?
Like you said, the big change came with electric power, and it started right when we started flying. All those years ago when brushless started coming on the scene and becoming popular and cheap. Well, you got to remember, motors before that were strictly a DC or brushed, meaning just like any other brushed motor, positive, negative, you swap them around, it goes the other way. It goes backwards, forwards, depending on which way you do it. Very easy to figure out. Well, with the new motors, with these brushless motors, what does that mean? Well, the old motors were DC. The new motors, being brushless, they're AC, just like your current in your house. There's 3 phases. Okay, so that escape basically takes it and converts it to AC power, 3 phases. And so it's going backwards now. Well, what do I do? I mean, these things aren't color coded. They're just all black, or they're all yellow, or all red. How can I tell? What do I have to do? Well, since it's AC, it's real simple. You just take any two wires, it doesn't matter what two, and you swap them. You're just changing where the phases are. And so it doesn't matter what 2 wires you take, just take them, swap them, and it's going to make it run in the opposite direction. It's just real simple.
So that just simple 2-minute fix fixed my problem. So now the motor's running in the right direction.
Now it's running in the right direction. Easy peasy. You don't have, a lot of, like, sometimes you may get these motors. Let's say you buy like E-Flight. E-Flight's pretty good about this. You'll buy a plane, and let's say you're taking it apart or you're putting it together. It'll have the escape there, or the ESC sitting there in front of you, and you go to hook it up to the motor, and it'll be color coded. and it'll be like red, green, black or something. The motor in on the escape, and you just put the color codes together and the thing goes in the right direction. So they kind of take that guesswork out for you. But let's say you wanted to upgrade that motor, and the next motor you get to put in there, which is more powerful, it's not red, green, or black, and people are just totally confused as to, well, what do I do? Now do I have to buy a new escape? No, you just have to swap any two wires around and it'll work. So
makes it pretty easy.
Yep.
It's a very simple solution, honestly, and once you understand how it works, it's very easy. It just motor runs backwards, flop the wires, motor runs forward, you're good to go. Now, why shouldn't I buy 100 amp ESC? I mean, you mentioned that, the motor has a 50 amps max and a burst of 60. Why can't I buy like some big 200?
So let's we'll make this kind of ridiculous. Let's say you have this tiny plane, and so the plane only needs a motor that it only takes 10 amps to run this thing, maximum,
right?
All right. And so you look in your box, and you happen to have an 80 amp, escape there. Well, can I use that? Sure, you could stick that in your plane and use it. Well, your plane only weighed an ounce. There was just
now it weighs like 2 pounds.
Right, it was only an indoor model for flying indoors. That 80 amp escape will work. It'll run that thing, and you'll never have to worry about burning the escape up. There's nothing you could. Unless you're putting on a 20 inch prop on there. There's nothing that you could do to burn that thing up. You'll burn the motor up before you'll burn the escape up, which is really hard to do, but you can do it. That escape, if you look at the size of a 10 amp escape to the 80 amp escape, it's quite a difference. There's a huge heat sink on that thing. Like you said, it may weigh 2 ounces, 3 ounces by itself. You just have too much escape for your need for flying. Go ahead and get a 10 or a 15 or 20 amp escape, and you'll be fine. And you'll keep the weight down and the size too. It may not fit in your model because it's so huge.
Yeah, the cost as well.
The cost, yes, that little thing.
150 to 200 amp ESC is probably $100+ right. Where 12 or 8 or 6 amp ESC is only
$10, $15.
$10. Yes, there's a big difference.
So it's a huge difference.
The main batteries that we use, the 3 or 4 or 5, 6, whatever the cell count is, it gives us energy to power up the ESC, and then the next step is the ESC to the motor. So I want to make sure that whatever my motor is on a burst, that's the way I usually pick it, by the burst. So if your motor has a 50 amp, it's good for 50 amps, but it's got a burst rating of 70, I usually go with a 70 ESC.
Right.
Or 80.
Right.
Or 80.
Right.
So that it can actually have its max and not burn up my ESC, because I have done that before too. I had an ESC in my box. I didn't know what the rating of it was. I thought it was a 30. It was actually a 20. I put it on a bigger motor. I went out and flew it. Next thing I know, I'm smelling smoke, and my ESC is, literally melted inside the airplane because I pushed too much. It wasn't that the battery and the motor combo couldn't handle the 50 amps that it was producing. It was the ESC that was only a 20 amp ESC versus a 30 amp ESC, which is what I should have. I should have had more like a 50 amp.
Right,
ESC.
and the modern escapes that we're using nowadays, the nice part about them is, let's say, like you said, let's say the motor takes a 30 amp. It can run 30 amps. Well, you can go out and buy a 30 amp escape, and you will be fine, because even though the escape says it can take 30 amps, generally they build into it about a 5 to 10 amp. They realize that people are going to be doing whatever with their systems, and so they kind of build in this little safety, about a 10 amp safety limit, burst safety limit. So that that escape should be fine up to 40 amps. Now, not continuously, but for a little short burst, it should be fine. So that's why I was saying, if you're going to buy something to put in there, hey, if you can buy a 40 amp costs the same as a 30 amp and it's the same size and everything, go ahead and get a 40 amp escape, stick it in the system, and now you don't have to worry about that burst or something happening, or now you have an escape that can more than handle anything that motor and battery combo are going to put out to it. So,
right. So now I've got the ESC, the battery, the ESC, and the motor. They kind of match. I've looked at everything, and then now I come to that propeller. And we talked a little bit earlier about it because you said that I can't put a bigger propeller on a small one. But let's say in Jim's case, he has this 40 amp. We're talking about his big 3D airplane. I need a couple 1,000 watts to get the thing to, hover and do some other stuff, have a good punch out of there. So I'm going to use a 4-cell. I'm going to use a 40 glow equivalent motor. I've got my 80 amp ESC. My motor is good for up to 50 and then a 70 burst. But now I have to decide this propeller, and there's several different types of propellers. There's the APC ones, which are all plastic. There's wooden ones. There's GWS ones for something smaller. But in this particular case, with a 40 amp, I'm going to go with something in that 13 to 14 range, and the pitch has to be equivalent to, what I'm going to use it for.
Right.
So let's say that if you think about it this way, the lower the pitch, the faster it's going to go.
The lower the pitch,
no,
I think it's the opposite.
The opposite. The higher the pitch, the faster it's going to go.
Yes, and
because a 6.6 prop is faster than a 6.4 prop.
Yep.
So you have to look at that pitch and see if it's flat. The flatter the pitch, the more speed it's built for. So like in the glow instance, I know those glow props have really flat, they look really flat. They don't have a really high pitch attitude to them. They're kind of flat. And it's because they're built for moving the airplane forward and having a little bit of speed to them, where the electric propellers are different than the glow. They actually have these pitches from I think I've seen in the 13s. I think I've seen a 13.4 all the way through a 13.10 or 12.
Sure. Well, once again, the difference between glow and electric, the greater thing for electric is that you get instantaneous power, where of course with the glow engine you have to build up your RPMs to a certain RPM, and you're holding that RPM to get your speed, and it may take that 5 seconds for that power band to happen, where 1 second, I'm from 0 to 100 with an electric motor. I have instant torque. I have instant, I'm trying to get my speed, so I don't have to build up to anything. It's just there.
Right. Well, most of my 3D airplanes that weigh in that 4 to 5 pounds and use a 40 size glow motor equivalent usually run on a 13.6. That's usually what I run. I do have one or two that have a 14.8, but now that I have the propeller, and I don't know what you use. I'm very fond of the wooden propellers.
Mainly that comes down to a personal.
I have.
Oh, what were you going to say? You can't see it, folks. He's pointing at his fingers.
Yeah, I want to have all my phalanges in place, but I do have some scars for some ACP type propellers. The ACP are great propellers. They're very rigid. They don't break very easily. The wooden prop to me gives a little bit more smoothness to it, I think, and they're easier to balance for me. But that's just my preference.
Yeah, I was ready to say, props are based, that comes down to our personal, preference, whether you want to use wood, whether you want to use a plastic prop, or if you want to use a carbon prop. And as I'm pointing at my finger, I'm missing the little tip of my finger because I used a carbon prop. And if you heard the episode that we talked about going to the hospital, I cut myself very well with the carbon prop. It just all comes down to what you like and how much you want to spend.
That's true, because the plastic ones are usually cheaper than the wooden ones, and then if you really have a bankroll, you can buy the carbon fiber, because I've seen carbon fiber props up into the couple $100.
Absolutely.
$150, $200.
Absolutely.
Around in there.
So,
they look good.
It just all depends on the plane, the look of the plane, what you want. Just all depends.
Well, I do a lot of scale stuff, like my Cub. It has a wooden one. Most of my 3D ones have wooden props as well. I just kind of they're Zor props.
Mm-hmm.
I got a good deal on some of them, so I bought some to kind of put on the airplane. I do like them. They They travel well. They sound better. They don't slice me up. I've been hit by a wooden prop and I didn't get cut near as bad as that Ginsu knife of an ACP that I've used once or twice. But I do like the power that the ACPs have because they're very speedy and very what's the word I'm looking for? The ACP is on the. I use those on my wing. ACP props on my wing. Or it's a similar. It's not the ACP. It's a gym fan, I think.
Yeah.
But they're made out of the same material.
Now we talked about the front of the plane. So we have the power. We have our motor. We have our escape. Let's talk about the battery.
Okay. So I use a 3 or 4 cell. Or what difference does it make? And
it doesn't.
Can I use a 4 if it requires a 4 cell? Can I use a 3 cell?
Sure. Just realize that you're just not going to have the same amount of voltage. You're not going to have the same amount of power. And you could see this by, once again, hooking up your watt meter. And let's say you hook up a system and you're getting 300 watts out of your system with the 4-cell battery. You put on a 3-cell battery, well, at the same power range with the same prop, you may only get, 200. That's quite a difference in performance.
True.
The plane will still fly. You're just not going to get the same performance out of it. You can still get the same performance out of it. Let's say the prop you're using was a 10-inch prop. So typically, if you drop the voltage like that, you go up 1 inch in size. So now you put on an 11-inch prop, and you should get close to what wattage range you were getting before. More voltage, you have more voltage, drop down an inch. You less voltage, you go up an inch. So.
Yeah, I've done that before, and you can see it. And that's the good news about the watt meter is that you can actually physically see the change. Because I for instance, we were doing that on my Pitts S12. I was using a 6-cell. We tried it with a 4-cell, and it just wasn't producing enough. Went to a 6-cell. Tried it on an 8-cell. The 8-cell 3-blade, little too much. The 16-inch prop that I had was a little much for that 8-cell, but it worked perfect with a 6-cell. 4-cell was more realistic, for that Pitts S12, but the 6-cell really gave it that extra power that I have. I only had to fly with half throttle compared to full throttle.
Right. And it depends on your flying style as well.
It's true.
Folks, because if, like we talk about our wings all the time, like we like flying our wings. Well, we like flying at, 100 miles an hour and just going crazy with them. Where somebody else, if, flying the same wing or a similar wing may not want to fly that speed or recklessly like we do. They just might want to putt around and just fly around and enjoy the wing, actually being able to see the wing.
Right.
So it depends on your style of flying too. That's the biggest thing that comes into this as well. Where, like I said, you can get away flying with that 100 watts reference that I said before, where Mike and I typically are always pushing 150 to 200 on like all our planes. It's just the way we are and the style of flying that we like. So,
sure.
Should a Cub be able to hover? No.
Speed.
Does the one that he has, can it do that?
Yes.
So it depends on your style of flying, folks. That's basically what we're saying here as well. But anyway, back to the battery. So depending on the style of flying that you're having, whether you're going to fly a 3-cell or 4-cell or a 2-cell, once again, it kind of comes into how much room do you have, right? In the bay of the body of the fuselage. Biggest thing is, let's just say the plane has room for, and it's said by the manufacturer that it takes a 3 or a 4-cell battery. Okay, great. And it's going to be, I don't know, let's just say it's a 2200, 3-cell battery that you're going to go put in there. So you see there's a sale at the store and they have a bunch of 2200 batteries on sale and they're $8 a piece. And you're like, oh, geez, they're like giving these things away. And you buy half a dozen of them and you run out and you hook up the first one, you go out and you go out and you run up your plane and you take it off and it takes off okay. And after a minute, it seems like it's struggling. And then after like 3 minutes, you're like, it looks like it's ready to land. And you come back and you land it and you open it up to take it out and put it in a fresh one. and you see that it's like doubled its size and it's all puffy and it's about to pop out of it's busting the shrink wrap that it was put in. You're like, holy crap, it's just puffed up like the Stay Puff Boy, just totally puffed up. What is this? There's a C rating that comes with the battery as well as to how much energy it can dump into that motor combo that you've come up with. And that's the next part of this that's kind of interesting, or it confuses a lot of people, because you go, well, that's a brand new battery. It shouldn't have puffed. It's not like 5 years old and I'm trying to fly with this thing. No, it's brand new. It should be great. Well, let's say you were trying to fly with a 15C battery, but the demands of your system needed a 30C battery. Well, your little battery's going to try as hard as it can, but it's not going to fare too well after trying to put out all that juice a capacity that it just doesn't have.
Right. I have several puffed batteries on my in my box.
Right. And it happens for various reasons. Once again, the age of the battery and how you treat the battery and things like that. But let's just say you're treating your batteries well. You normally only fly them down to 30 to 50%. You don't treat them hard or let them sit out in the hot baking sun or let them freeze outside or whatever. You're decent to them. But really, the next thing you have to look at is the demands of your system. And not to say it takes a little bit of math, but it just all the things we've been talking about, looking at what demands the motor needs, what demands the escape can handle, and in there as well, like Mike was talking about, it may tell you what burst or what types of demands it has, and hopefully your motor has that information, or you can find that information, because then you can gauge, well, do I need to go out and buy the newest battery there is out there for $150 for this super battery that puts out 150C? Probably not. Do you just need to buy a 25 or 30C battery? Probably so. It just all depends with the setup of your motor combo.
Yeah, for my 3D type stuff, I usually always try to get a 40C rating or higher. And then for my EDFs, I try to get 60 to 90 C ratings. Right.
And basically what I tell people is, depending on the style of what you're flying, if what the baseline for your plane is, buy as much C rating as you can afford, right? If if your plane takes a 30C, let's say you can take a 30C battery, capacity battery, that's all it needs. Well, do you need to buy a 65C?
Yes.
Well, sure.
I'm sorry. I thought you were asking me. That wasn't a question. I'm going to buy. I'm going to buy a 60C.
What I'm basically saying is, yes, you can buy a 65C battery for it. You could buy a 100C battery for it. But you're only going to, for what you're going to get from it, are you going to get extra performance from it? You'll get a little bit. For a prop plane, you probably won't notice the difference.
No.
For an EDF plane, yes, you will notice the difference. And that we'll have to talk about that in another podcast about EDFs and prop driven planes. But basically, do you need to spend that money? And I will say, no, probably not. You could probably get the cheaper 25 to 30, 35C batteries and you'll be fine. But you have to know for the, once again, the style and the type of, and the setup that you have, what it's going to be drawing, what the demands are for a battery.
If you think back to when we first started, we were using 5C, 10C, 20C batteries, man. When the 20C batteries came out, we were like, woohoo, look at all this power we got. So you can use, lower C rated batteries. It's not going to hurt. It doesn't degrade the performance that much, but some of the newer systems, they're capable of absorbing more than 5C at a time. Because the early motors that they came out, the early Outrunners, they were really, I don't want to say poorly wound, but I have a couple and they weren't the best wound, type
That's
motors.
True. But basically it comes down to, once again, if you have a 10-inch prop plane, and it just buzzes around, the field, doesn't do anything too crazy. It's not going to be too amp hungry. It's not going to. It doesn't need that much C rating in order to fly. And even doing some acrobatics, it just doesn't need it because it's a lower KV motor. It's providing a lot of thrust,
torque.
And torque. So you're just not. It just doesn't need a higher amp rating. Where our wings that are flying 100 miles an hour that we're pushing, for these short bursts, where it's a huge, tremendous drain upon the battery. It's amp hungry. It's just sucking the life out of that battery, and it needs a huge fire hose to give it, all the juice and capacity that it can get during those short bursts that we're running it. Where once again, the other plane that's just, our trainer type plane, it could fly around on a 20C battery. It's just sipping it with a teeny tiny straw.
Right.
Where the other one, that needs a fire hose. You just have to look at the capacity, when you look at the motor that you're putting in this and what you're asking it to do as to the C rating that you're going to need.
Yep. That sounds logical to me. I hope that helps out, the understanding of how to put it together. The main thing is that the first thing when we put an airplane together, the first thing we look for technically is a motor. That's really what we look for. How much, when I do the research on it, I go to Hobby King or Banggood or Hacker, Scorpion. What I'll do is I'll look to see, first of all, if I have a couple of glow airplanes that have been converted to electric. So I look and see what it has on a glow, and then I'll start there. Then I'm looking at how many watts this motor can put out. And the more watts, the lower that KV number, usually the more watts I can put out because it's a lower KV. It's willing to accept more electricity than a higher KV motor, which is meant for faster speeds and faster RPMs. So if you think about it that way, the KV is usually an RPM. If you think about it in terms of RPM, then you've got a really low RPM motor. You can use a really large prop and a lot of energy to turn that prop. Where if you have a really tiny motor and it wants to spin at 60,000 revolutions a minute, it's going to be a high KV, and you want to use a little bitty prop in order to get the same effect. So for Jim and some of the other guys that are glow that are starting to dabble into electrics, I think the first major thing for them is to look at the motor and get the specs on it, trying to figure out how many watts this little motor will produce, and will that be equivalent to the size of my airplane? So, I mean, that's a good starting point. And then email us. Hey, I got this motor. What should I do?
Right.
You don't have to email us, but I'm just saying.
And once again, we say it every time, but going online and going to things like RC groups is tremendous.
Yeah.
Because there's already been somebody out there who's made a mistake or is working on a project for you. So you're not starting totally in the dark. So if you have a plane that you want to convert, you can go on there and say, and just type in there, converting a SIG Cadet to electric, and somebody's done it. Or, where they have a kit that is electric, and you can go on there and you can see what motors they're using.
Right.
And now that's taken out, there's half your guesswork is out, because now you look and you see all the motors that everybody else is using. You can see like there may be two guys that are using two totally different motors. And after a while, you can even ask the guys, well, why are you using this motor as opposed to this other motor? And the guy goes, well, because I want to stand this plane up on its tail and go up and walk it down the street, where the other guy's just putting around.
Right.
And towing gliders or something. He doesn't need that kind of performance out of his aircraft. Once again, there's that difference in style of flying, but at least there's a reference. You can get on there and you could talk to those guys, and then you could see about, batteries they're using. And it's a huge stepping stone for figuring this stuff out. And then it'll start to click as to what you need or what that plane, desires or wants, or specialties that it needs, because, because like I said, I'm trying to think of a plane that I had. It wasn't that tall of a plane, and therefore I couldn't put that big of a propeller on it. Mm-hmm. So I had to go up in voltage. I had to get a motor that had a little bit more RPMs on it. in order to get the equivalent power.
Right.
So it was one of those things I had to rethink my, how I was going to use this setting for my setup. And that's a little bit more challenging, but, after asking some questions, it's pretty easy to figure out after a while.
Well, that's where I think I would start. Motor first, and then when you figure out the motor to go in, look for the ESC. Whatever your burst is on the motor, just kind of go up a couple, and then grab the propeller that it suggests, and then drag out your watt meter, put it all together, see how much power you're actually producing.
And folks, this is the great thing about watt meters. They've dropped. They're only $20.
Yeah, they're $20-$30. I have two of them actually.
They're terrific, and they even have them now that they're so small that you could put them in a plane and go fly the plane around,
right.
Land it, and they could tell you what your battery performance was doing, how while you were flying, where it was really using the most energy, if it was you can look at all sorts of things, and you can figure out from that. You can figure out what prop is the best prop to use, and that's the big thing too. For me, even though I had a watt meter, sometimes I would go fly the plane, and even though, let's say, a 10.6 prop was the best performing one, for flying the battery for a longer period of time, it just didn't give me the performance that I wanted out of something else that was 6.4 or 6.3 or or 10.3 or something. And then I put that on there. I was like, ooh, well, now this flies a lot better with this prop. It's just one of those flying things, I guess.
Well, you always tell a really interesting story about when I came up to Alaska with the slow flies, and we had two totally separate systems.
Yeah, that's a pretty good story.
Yeah.
So Mike came up to visit me one time up in Alaska, and we, like I said, at that time we were flying a lot of Blue Core stuff, and we had this 3D. It's a trainer plane. It was called the Slow Fly 28. We got up my Blue Core, and Mike made one in like 15 minutes, and I took maybe 2 hours. And the thing was, they're totally the same, except for two. Well, you just
if the
cut it
if
out,
the shoe
just,
fits where,
and just right, yeah, and just flew the thing. Made this thing. I was all being meticulous and whatever, and it just didn't matter. In the end, it didn't make the plane fly any better than yours. Cut out with a pair of scissors. So anyway, so the big difference. So here was the difference between Mike's plane and my plane. Mike's plane flew. I do believe you had a two cell in yours, right?
I did, with a 1500 kV motor.
Right, and you had a 15 or 1700 kV motor,
1700.
and it was the same. It was the same manufacturer of the motor. Okay, and I had a 1300 kV motor, but I flew mine on a 3-cell, and the thing was, same equipment, same servos, same everything. When you flew the two planes, they flew pretty much the same. I mean, it was really hard to tell the difference between the two aircraft. Now, where they differentiated at was Mike could fly a little bit longer than I could, but I had a little bit more bottom end than he had.
That's true.
But other than that, the planes flew pretty much the same. You could both hover. They could both do all the 3D maneuvers we wanted. It was just that little small difference between the planes. Now, Mike's plane was a little lighter than my plane because he was flying with a 2-cell than my 3-cell. I had a little bit more weight. But once again, I could pull out of a hover a little faster than he could. But at that time, at our level of flying, it just didn't matter. I mean, it really did.
Yeah, the performance was pretty close to about as identical as you could get it for being.
Yeah, here it was. We had two different battery setups, two different KV setups, but we ended up with the same performance. Ultimately, I guess what I'm saying is don't worry too much about it. It just kind of comes down to what you have, what you're looking to do. Maybe you might want to build a really light build. Like Mike did. And that wasn't why he built his, it's just what we happened to have at the time.
Yeah. It was what was in my box, actually.
Yeah. It was what was in his box. So it just kind of comes down to the style of flying you're doing, what you're trying to, what type of, how you're trying to fly your aircraft, what you have, but ultimately, as long as it all fits and it all works, it'll all work out. Because I think you had a larger prop than I did. I had a smaller prop than you did.
That's a good question. I thought we had the same size prop, but I may have had just an inch.
I think you had a little bit larger prop than I did.
Not much.
I think like you had a 10-inch and I had a 9-inch or something or 8, that type of thing. 8 and 9. It was like a 1-inch difference in the props, but like you said, they all performed exactly the same.
Yeah, performance-wise, they were pretty close to match, and we actually had a lot of fun with those. We flew them to total destruction.
I
mean, I don't remember. We strapped streamers to the back of them and chased each other around, and I don't think we've ever laughed so hard flying at a field because we were having so much fun with those things.
That's the beauty of Blue Core.
Yeah,
because I think after besides the Blue Core. Once you had the initial, servos, which they were 9-gram servos,
they were like $3.
They were $3 or $2 a piece, and so we had 4 of them, right?
Yeah.
So the Escape was $10 or $15, and then the motors we were using, the Blue One, they were called Blue Wonder motors. They were $8 motors, I think.
Yeah, 5, I think they were $5.
Yeah, somewhere around there. But ultimately, if you look at the main components, and of course your receiver, which was probably the most expensive thing at the time.
Like 30
once you had
bucks
that,
into the whole
the
whole thing.
And the Blue Core was nothing. I mean, it weighed nothing. It cost nothing.
Yeah.
So like I said, we just flew the planes to destruction, and it was just that was a lot of fun. And you didn't have to worry. You smashed whatever. You just walked over, grabbed some tape, taped it up, slapped some glue on. That's
right. Some packing tape or Blenderm, you're good to go.
You're good to go. I think that's wagon. It'll still fly.
It was funny though, because I had built when I got up there, I had built probably 5 or 6 of these, and I had found out that my first one was exactly like what Jay was talking about, where it was very meticulous. I traced it out. I mean, everything was right on the money. And by the time I crashed 3 or 4 or 5 of them, down to where they were just nothing left of them, I got to the point where I'd just take my X-Acto knife and wag it, just be like, okay, that's close enough. And just
kind of got it in the general.
It's gonna fly, just put it all together.
I mean, I'm out there measuring the thing, and I'm doing this and sanding it and doing all. And Mike's like, literally with a pair of scissors, kind of cutting around. Yeah, that's about.
I think it was an X-Acto knife, but I just outlined it, traced it, cut the wings out, 45-degree cuts, Blendermed it together. I think you're right. I was done in probably about 15 to 20 minutes, and Jay was over there just finishing up his drawing. I don't know what he was doing over there, but he looked up and went, "You're done?" I was like, "Yeah," but it was a great time. They were fun airplanes.
Yeah, it was.
And I still own several actually in the other room, so they're fun to kind of.
In fact, you got AK Mike started on that stuff.
Yeah, that's
when
right.
He came down to see you in Arizona, so
they're fun to just go out into the backyard or front yard and. Just fly them around. If they hit a tree or whatever, you're not crying, because you busted up your balsa wood plane. So, well, hopefully that answers some of the questions that Jim has. I know it's kind of one of those things that converting, honestly, I've never flown glow, so I don't understand the Slimer part of it. I know Jay's got some experience flying some of that, but for me, I've been an electric since day one. I've always had electrics. Not saying that I wouldn't like to come down there and fly with Jim and the guys, try my hand at glow, but or some sort of a motor, Slimers, I guess. But for us, it's been a long haul, kind of trying to hit and miss and figure it all out. And in today's world, it's so much easier because the manufacturers have already done all the research for us. I actually have a couple of sheets printed out that have all the information. If I want a motor, I just open my drawer, pull it up, look at it, see what it does. Gives me all the KVs, gives me all the prop settings and all that stuff. And
between, like you said, between Hobby King and or E-Flite, I mean, they'll say this is a power 32, this is a power 50, this is a power 60, power 90 motor, and and get this Escape with this.
Right.
Fly these batteries with this combo, or you just get the combo. You just go down there and say, I'm converting this plane. Okay, here's the 60 combo, or here's the 40 combo.
Right.
There's everything you need.
It is pretty convenient, and they have several motor mounts too to add to the front of your motor box when you get rid of your glow. Pull the glow motor off there. It's shorter than the.
That's the biggest problem,
Yeah.
I think, with any of this motor stuff, because honestly, when I would do a conversion like that, the thing I would know about the size of the motor that I needed, the biggest thing I would look for would be how much room there was. So let's say it was 60 centimeters. Then I'd look for a motor that was 60 centimeters, right? Or close to it.
Sure.
Because what typically would happen is you'd have the motor would be way shorter than the engine that was in there that I was replacing. And that was the hardest part about that, because then you'd either have to make a motor mount, or you have to put extensions or legs or standoffs or something to take up that room.
Yeah,
So
and that's something that's come a long way
time
too. Is
consuming.
those standoffs? They used to put washers behind it, and a screw, a thread all, or whatever. And now they've actually got them to where they're 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, up to like 5 inches. So, and they're aluminum.
Or those motor mounts they have now, they're all pre-assembled, and then but they have all this adjustment in them, and you just screw the thing on the top and just move it back to it fits, and then screw it down.
Yeah, that's why I have one of those. I think,
easy peasy.
My Katana.
Oh, yep. Yeah,
It's
either
all
Katana
metal.
or you have that in the biplane. One of those.
Yeah, it was one of them. But yeah, it just moves back and forth, and you just turn a couple of screws and slide it where you need it to be. It works perfect. Now, it's not cheap. It's probably $25 or $30 for that metal motor mount, but it was worth it to me because I can get the motor exactly where I want it compared to, just using standoffs. I can only get it an inch or two.
And doing some whittling.
Yeah, exactly. So
Making it fit.
Well, I guess an update on the field. I heard you painted some things, or what did you do down there?
In between we actually had a break in the weather a little bit where it dropped down to the 80s, high 80s, I should say, like at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so I ran out there and I finished scraping off one of the benches that are out there, and because it's a metal bench with a wooden top. So I scraped off all the rust and I repainted it, and so one down, one to go. I'm just waiting for another break in the weather when I can get out there and not die.
I hear you.
And start scraping all the paint off and rust off the other one so I can repaint that one.
Well, good. Well, we're interested to hear how that goes, and Jim, if you have any questions, go ahead and email us again or give us a call. And if you're listening anywhere in the world and you have a comment or a question, then feel free to email us, Park Flyer Podcast.
Or if we've confused you anymore, I got you more confused, please give us a call or write us, and we'll try to unconfuse or we'll have an update next time we come back on.
That's true. So, well, it's been great talking to you tonight, Jay. That pretty much wraps up our Park Flyer Podcast for tonight. We are looking
Mike.
forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Well, good.
And hopefully both of us can get out and do some flying.
Yeah, I need
Been a little
to.
busy, so
It's been really hot here, and we had the monsoon seasons, so a couple of the guys canceled today because they had to do some monsoon cleanup.
In Arizona, you have monsoons. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
it does happen. We got a little flash floods.
I know. It's just it's like I said, it's like unbelievable land. It's hard for me to just take all this in.
I know. Well, it takes a little bit getting used to, but once you get used to it, it makes sense.
Okay. Well, I wish you best of luck, and hopefully you can get out and get some flying done.
Yeah,
So,
same to you. I appreciate it.
all right.
Well, thanks for joining us, folks. We'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Have a good night.
Night, folks. See ya.
You have been listening to the Park Flyer Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit. Please give our show a star rating and review, and feel free to email us your questions, topics, or suggestions to parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com.